I'd like to do my closing remarks. You all are doing very important work. It's not always easy. It's not ever recognized to the level that it should be. You're doing the right thing, and I hope you continue to do so, because all of our kids deserve the chance to succeed. It shouldn't matter where you're from, what your skin color is, what your background is. That should not matter. You should all be given as an equal opportunity to succeed. That's what our country's about. And keep doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. That's a hard act to follow. It does dovetail with what I'm going to be talking about a little bit later on, which has to do with the bias towards experienced learners. We didn't coordinate what we were going to say at all, but your talk about how every child should be given a chance to succeed and the support to make sure they succeed, that is that's the focus of NIFTY, and that is exactly what my talk's going to be about. So, you may recall that Carl Hendrick had a very, very positive message, I think, in which he talked about how instructional designers could implement 10 rules to ensure that learning happens for all kids. Well, I've got a slightly darker, more negative speech to give, talk to give, which has to do with biases, a very, very deep and prevalent bias that really is related to a lot of the problems that we experience in education. It's the bias towards experienced learners and away from less experienced or novice learners. But don't worry, it's got a happy ending because it's got direct instruction, which rejects that bias and gives you all the tools so you can make sure that all students succeed. Okay, so you've probably been in many classrooms of the type that I'm talking about, where there's heterogeneous grouping and the experienced learners are those who are favored. You know, it's those classrooms where there's just a few hands that shoot up. They're the same kids who get called on all the time. Or if another kid gets called on, they don't know the answer, then the teacher goes back to the reliable ones. These are the kids in the classrooms where they have more background knowledge. They already know some or a lot of what the teacher is talking about, and they get the reinforcement, and their self-concept improves. While those of the less experienced, and especially the novice learners, they don't get that attention, they don't get instruction at their grade level. It's really interesting because with these more experienced learners who are getting this attention and essentially instruction more at their level, is that they can thrive in almost any instructional setting. And as a result, there can be an instructional illusion in which the faulty instruction is leading to outcomes. It can lead to an illusion which the kids are succeeding, these high performers are succeeding because of the instructional methodology rather than despite the instructional methodology. Make no mistake, the consequences of this bias are very dire, that the more experienced learners are getting instruction more at their instructional level, whereas the novices, they do not get instruction at their instructional level and they are not learning nearly as much. Their self-concept suffers. Labels will then get attached to these children, as being learning deficient in one way or another. And what do you know? Those labels become self-fulfilling because the kids don't get the instruction they need. So yes, they do become deficient in various ways in terms of learning. And a real tragic, I think, in terms of Greek tragedy, there could be a classic Greek tragic play, easy for me to say, about this situation, because the intention of the staff, 99% of the time, is to promote social equity, to promote justice for all, and yet they use methods in which, in fact, they are helping to widen this gap between the experienced children and the less experienced ones. Let me read a couple of quotes from Carl Hendrick's latest book, Instructional Illusion, which I recommend to you. It's a very good read, and it dovetails so nicely with so many things that we've seen in the DI world. He and the other authors identify several instructional illusions that dovetail with this bias towards experienced learners. So from chapter 2, the expertise illusion, experts tend to make faulty assumptions about what novices do and don't know, and the more expert we become, the harder it is to appreciate a novice's level of understanding, okay? And synonymous with this expertise illusion, at first was called the curse of knowledge, came in from economics and then into education, and you can think of it as the common phrase of as easy as ABC. And for those of us in this room, we know that teaching the ABCs, in other words, teaching to read, is not always easy at all. And having kids learn to read is not easy at all, especially when you expand it to D, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Okay, here comes the positive stuff, folks, okay? So in contrast to the expertise illusion, you know, the DI authors have been tremendous in looking at instruction from the novice learner's viewpoint. And my father, in case you don't know, my father is Siegfried Engelmann, Zig, as he was often called. And he was a professor of education at the University of Oregon, as well as the founder of NIFTY and the senior DI author. And he had an uncanny ability to see things from the learner's perspective. And I love this photo here, taken in Chicago in 1970, because here he's physically getting down on the kids' level, but he cognitively, intellectually got down on their level day in and day out, and so did the other authors. So what did he and the other authors do? Well, they looked at potential areas of confusion, figured out how to pre-teach and take other steps to make sure that that confusion is prevented. Then they went out and tested the instructional sequences to make sure that they worked with kids, and revised the programs until they did work with kids. And my hat goes off to all those involved in the corrective reading recent revision, because they did the same field test and revision. It's terrific. Now I'm wondering how many of you, please raise your hand if you have heard of the Brighter Engelmann preschool in the 1960s, which, oh, thank goodness, it looks like maybe even half the folks. That really was the launch of direct instruction. But let me do the reverse. How many of you haven't seen the film, that black and white grainy film of my father having a playful back and forth with kids who went through that preschool? Please raise your hand if you haven't seen that film yet. Okay. In the next few days, your earliest opportunities, I really urge you to go and look at that film. It's a playful back and forth between my father and these kids as kindergartners after they had been in the preschool 1 or 2 years and received math instruction for only 20 minutes a day. They were identified for this experimental preschool because they each had an older sibling who was identified as special needs. And I'm getting goosebumps on top of goosebumps. Once you see it, I guarantee you, your vision of what not only at-risk kids, but all kids can achieve will change once you see the math those kids mastered and retained, obviously, in their long-term memory. Okay, one thing, in contrast to working with high performers, Siegfried Engelmann loved to work with novice kids. Why? Because if they didn't know anything at all, then any errors or misconceptions that they developed were the result of his instructional design or presentation. And so he took any of the errors that they took as feedback to make changes, which he did until they could master the material. So he saw errors not as something deficient in the learner, but deficient in the instructional sequence. And that is really huge. And experienced learners don't provide this. You don't learn as much as an instructional designer, which we can ask the authors who are here, when they already know some or a lot of what you're trying to teach them. You're not really then teaching them that. Here is one of the most important points about this, aside from lower performing kids. Any of these instructional sequences that the DI authors developed, not only do they work for the novice students, but they work for more experienced students. All you have to do is place them at their skill level, teach them to mastery, and move them through the material as quickly as possible. So that's a hugely important point if you're trying to look at doing a school-wide direct instruction implementation. So I've been talking in some generalities right now. Now let's look at some specific practices that favor experienced learners. And so we'll look at ineffective Tier 1 instruction, paltry review of previous learning, haphazard instructional design, burdensome homework, and direct instruction rejects the bias in each of these areas. All right, first of all, ineffective Tier 1 instruction. Despite the efforts of Stephanie Stoller, who's right here, she said, "I'm trying," through the Reading Science Academy to inform leaders, district leaders, state leaders, principal leaders, that Tier 1 instruction can mean core instruction for each child at their instructional level. Despite her work and others to try to inform them of this, the default definition and practice of Tier 1 is to do a one-size-fits-all where all kids in a grade level receive instruction at that grade level. And that's terrible for kids who are below grade level. They are sitting through up to as much as 90 minutes in which they are not receiving instruction, they're getting pieces of instruction. Tier 2 is relegated often to as little as 20 minutes 3 times a week where they supposedly do get instruction at their level. And getting back to the Greek tragic aspect of this, often very noble reasons are cited for this arrangement to give the students opportunity for to access grade level material. How many of you have heard that before? Yes, quite a few of you have heard that. Or simply the need to meet state or national curricula. But make no mistake, the effects of this one-size-fits-all is devastating. You get all those effects that I already talked about how the learning gaps widen, how these kids who are below grade level in performance are developing misconceptions because they don't have the prerequisite skills to understand what's going on. They can't access that. One particular point of frustration has to do with direct instruction spoken English, which Brian mentioned. That's a program that is for kids who are non-English speakers who have at least a 3rd grade command of their native language. We have tried, and tried again to get schools to implement 90 minutes because of in this program, Dice for 90 minutes. Because what else is the child going to do? They can't access content courses. They can't access especially English courses. But we see time after time in high schools where they're still only giving 45 minutes to Dice, but kids are in English literature classes reading such things as Moby Dick. So welcome to the USA. Here's Moby Dick. Read the first 100 pages by next Monday. Thank you. Thank you. So I've wondered if the adults have really, what I call channel your zig and put yourself in the situation of these kids to know what it's like to be put in a situation which you're receiving instruction that is simply way beyond your means. So imagine yourself, if you don't have a background in physics, that you just are thrust into a third-year college-level physics course where they're talking about Kepler's laws of motion and the elliptical orbits and how they have the same amount of area over time circumscribed. That's actually first-year physics, because I remember that. But so third year is much more than that. Of course you would feel lost, you would feel discouraged, but add to that whether the professor expected you to master that. That's what we're doing when we put kids who have below grade level skills into tier 1, because explicitly or implicitly we're saying this is what you should be able to do. And that's how to develop a really poor self-image. Okay, DI to the rescue, as we said before. Kids are always, if it's well implemented, always receiving instruction directly at their skill level. As you know, by the end of this conference, I hope you know that kids are placed by their performance level, according to a placement test, not their grade level. There are different placement lessons for the kids. That groups are flexible, so if they need to move to a higher or lower group, they can. And additional time, a second reading period is given to all kids in KN1 and students in grade 2 and higher who perform above grade level. And I think the participants of the Admin Leadership Institute know that's going to be on the next Kahoot, right? It's an inside joke. Okay, so let's move on to the next practice that favors experienced learners, and that's inadequate review. And I tried to channel my inner Anita Archer by coming up with a snappy rhyming saying, paltry review, focus on the new. Yeah, okay. Well, in many classrooms, most nearly all of a lesson involves new material, but it's not necessarily new for the experienced learners, giving them the advantage, because experienced learners who already have background knowledge will be able to acquire most, if not all, of what's contained in those lessons. They have much smaller amount to learn. And I have to say, this isn't something, there's not just a clear divide between minimally explicit instruction and explicit instruction here. Because in small DI explicit instruction classes, you can see inadequate review. And I'm reminded everyone of Rosenstein's first principle, begin a lesson with a short review of previous learning. He didn't underline and bold short, I did that. So that's just the opposite, as you may know. That's the flip, thank you for laughing. That's the flip, by the way, of DI, in which we have 10 to 15%, only 10 to 15% new, and 85 to 90% of each lesson is review or applications of skills and concepts that are introduced previously. So If kids are placed appropriately, taught to mastery, they will go up this mastery learning staircase and be able to master everything that's there. All right, let's move to the next example, which is conventional approaches that can confuse learners. And the example here is teaching kids letter names or sounds in the alphabetical order. A, B, I'll say A, B, C, D. Okay? So it's highly confusing to kids who are unfamiliar with symbols. If they've been living in a world of objects, let's channel our inner Zig again, go back and think. If you're a young child, you have only been exposed to objects, you learn very quickly that an object's position or orientation does not matter. It's still the same object, it's still a clicker. Then they introduce these things to you in red, and you think, hey, that looks like the same thing. These things they're calling B and D, they're just flipped, and you turn around, they're a P and a Q. So rather than recognizing the intelligence that these kids recognize the sameness as objects of these, they are instead labeled often as learning deficient and possibly dyslexic. It's a problem in instructional design. It's not a problem with the children if they recognize that sameness. Here comes DI to the rescue. One of the things that the DI authors have done is separate potentially confusing concepts by many lessons. This is a table showing the order of introduction of the sound symbols for RMSE, Reading Mastery Signature Edition, grade K. You can see the symbols are on the left, and the lessons in which they're introduced is on the right. And here the sound for the letter D is introduced on lesson 27. Note also that this is not just a ball and stick, it's a little oval there. And watch as all these other sound symbols are introduced, all these other lessons pass before kids are introduced to the sound the letter B makes, and the B looks different. So 121 lessons. This is just one of a zillion different design elements the DI authors have done to prevent confusion. Okay, I'm conscious of time and how I want to get to the ending, so we'll go quick through homework. How many of you are now or have ever been parents of school-aged children? Please raise your hand. Quite a few of you, yes. Well, probably a good portion of you have seen the burdensome, often wasteful, ineffective, confusing, frustrating homework that is sent that saps energy of the kids and wastes time. And in DI, there's very, very little homework. It starts only in the second grade for some programs. It always just reinforces the learning. As my father here said in this article, which is available on zigzag.com, those who champion homework seriously discriminate against at-risk populations, a lot of which have novice learners. There's also a really nice article here by our own Naveen Rizvi-Bolton. This is a summary of what I've talked about before, about how DI rejects, dispels the bias towards experienced learners, but it has to be implemented with fidelity, folks. Otherwise, guess what? You might actually inadvertently contribute to the bias towards experienced learners. So please implement programs with fidelity. And contact us if you have any needs in terms of training, coaching, et cetera. But I want to focus my remaining time on this field testing. And, you know, we have all sorts of different safety procedures and regulations with regard to building safety, food safety, car safety. When are we going to get instructional safety? And not just simply alignments that look at different components. You wouldn't say, well, they're that vehicle has a propulsion system, wheels, a steering wheel, and a seat. It's ready to go. No, you would try that thing out and have it revised, of course. So I want to recognize now the DI program authors who are here today, who have put so much of their time and effort into making sure these DA programs have all these components and that they work for all the children. So I'm going to ask them to stand as a group. You each deserve a standing ovation, but let's give you one big standing ovation right now, yes. And I'm going to also ask that all those from Engelmann, Becker, MHE who've been involved in support of the field testing of the programs, are any of them here also? Well, we'll clap for them in absentia. How's that? They do a lot of work. All right, I have a big announcement. It may explain a little bit why Brian was getting a little choked up. I thought he was going to spill the beans, but I'm going to try not to to get choked up either. He's retiring from being the outreach director, and Elisa Kerr is coming on as the new outreach director. So please join me. We're going to have, next year we'll have a really big event and everything celebrating Brian's contribution. But for right now, there's just a quick announcement. Please help show appreciation for Brian's work and for welcoming Elisa. Here are the dates of the next conference. Put them on your calendar. Come back. There's so much great stuff here. And not to be too melodramatic, but I'm going to turn it over to Brian. I'm going to turn it over to him for one last time to end the closing.
Well, I didn't exactly expect that. Thank you very much, all of you. It's been a great ride, actually. Shoot, I started when I was 17 years old. I remember somebody said, what was that? It was October 19th of 1978. I walked into the offices at 805 Lincoln. Susie Hanner interviewed me and said, well, we need somebody to do shipping out morphographic spelling, boxes and boxes and boxes. Every day after school, after high school, I would go in and spend a couple hours. What started as a job has become a life's work. And I have many, many people to thank for that. Anyhow, like I said a few moments ago, you all are doing important work. It's been a great privilege to be a part of that, and I will continue to be a small part of that. But thank you for that, and we've got the rest of today to go. Get back into your sessions, work hard, be smart, do the right thing, and we'll see you again next year. Thank you very much.
NIFTY provides implementation guidance to school and district leaders, as well as training and coaching to teachers implementing direct instruction programs to ensure that all students are successful. For more information on what NIFTY can do for your school or district, visit our website, www.nifty.org.